The research outpost on Kepler 442b was quiet that morning, just as it always was. Dr. HFY sat in the observation room, drinking her coffee and watching the endless landscape of red rocks and purple plants stretch out before her. She had been on this planet for 3 years now, studying the ecosystem and the strange creatures that lived here. Most of the other scientists found the work boring, but HFY loved it. She loved understanding how life worked in places so different from Earth. The sun was rising over the eastern ridge when the alarm went off. HFY jumped up, spilling her coffee across the desk. The alarm was not one she heard often. In fact, she had only heard it a few times in all her years at the outpost. It meant something was wrong. Something outside the safety fence. Something dangerous. She ran to the communications center where Ji-won, the outpost commander, was already standing. Ji-won was a tall woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She had been leading this outpost for 5 years, and everyone respected her decisions, even when they did not understand them. "What happened?" HFY asked, trying to catch her breath. "Motion sensors picked up something near the western perimeter," Ji-won said, her eyes fixed on the monitor in front of her. "Something big. Something that should not be there." HFY moved closer to the screen. She could see shapes moving in the distance, dark shapes against the red ground. Her heart started beating faster. She knew what those shapes were. She had read about them in every report, every warning, every lesson when she first arrived at the outpost. Vexthari. The Vexthari were apex predators. They were feared across the entire galaxy. Every spaceship captain, every military officer, every scientist who had ever encountered them had one thing in common. They had survived by running away. The Vexthari did not negotiate. They did not communicate. They hunted and they killed, and nothing in their path survived. At least that was what everyone said. "How many?" HFY asked quietly. 3, Ji-won replied. "They are small, young, but they are still Vexthari." HFY looked at the shapes again. Ji-won was right. They were smaller than the adult Vexthari described in reports, but still massive compared to humans. They stood on 4 legs, but they seemed to move differently from the adults in the pictures. They seemed slower, less certain. "They are just sitting there," one of the other technicians said. "Why are they not attacking?" Everyone was silent. No one had a good answer to that question. After an hour, nothing had changed. The 3 creatures were still outside the fence, and they had not made any move to attack. They just sat there, almost as if they were waiting for something. Ji-won decided to send out a remote drone to get a closer look. The drone flew out and moved closer to the creatures. What it showed on the screen made HFY gasp. The Vexthari were not the powerful, healthy animals she had expected to see. They were thin. Very thin. She could see their ribs. One of them had a wound on its side that looked infected. They looked hungry. They looked lost. "They are cubs," HFY said suddenly, understanding it completely. "They are young Vexthari, and they are separated from their pod. They are lost." "All the more dangerous," Ji-won said. "Young predators without their pack are unpredictable. They could be desperate. We need to keep them away from the outpost." "Wait," HFY said. She was thinking now, thinking hard about what she was seeing and what it meant. "What if we do not? What if we help them?" Everyone in the room stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "Help them how?" Ji-won asked slowly. "Feed them. They are starving. A starving animal is dangerous. A fed animal is less likely to attack. And if we show them kindness, maybe they will realize that humans are not enemies. Maybe they will choose not to hurt us." Ji-won looked at HFY for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "Protocol says no interaction with unknown hostile life forms." "They are not unknown anymore," HFY said. "We know they are young. We know they are starving. We know they are lost. And we know they have not attacked us yet. They have had the chance, and they have not taken it. Haiwan, Jiwan began. Let me try, Haiwan interrupted. I will be careful. I will use all safety procedures, but let me try to help them. Jiwan was quiet for a very long time. She was the commander, and this was her decision to make. Finally, she nodded. All right, but you will not go outside the fence. You will not take any risks. You will use the food dispensers on the eastern wall. You can leave food there and watch what happens. If anything seems wrong, anything at all, we shut it down. Do you understand? Haiwan nodded quickly. I understand. Thank you. 20 minutes later, Haiwan was loading the eastern food dispensers with meat and protein supplements. Through the reinforced window, she could see the three creatures. They were watching her. Their heads were moving, and she realized they could smell the food. Their noses were moving in the air, testing the scents. She pushed the first batch of food out through the dispensers. It fell on the ground outside the fence with a soft thud. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the smallest of the three creatures moved. It moved slowly, carefully, as if it was afraid. But it moved toward the food. The others followed, and soon all three were eating, pulling the meat into their mouths with surprising gentleness. There was no fighting, there was no violence, there was just hungry animals eating, grateful for the food. Haiwan watched them eat, and something shifted inside her. These were not the monsters she had been warned about. These were living creatures who needed help. These were young and lost and hungry, and now they were being fed because someone had chosen kindness instead of fear. She did not know it then, but this moment would change everything. The three young Vexathari would change her life, and she would change theirs. In the days and weeks that followed, these creatures would learn that humans were not their enemies. They would learn that kindness existed in places they had never expected to find it, and the Pantry incident was still weeks away. For now, Haiwan simply watched them eat, and she felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy's understanding of the Vexathari was wrong. Hope that understanding and compassion could bridge the gap between species that the rest of the universe believed could never understand each other. 3 weeks had passed since Haiwan first fed the Vexathari cubs, and the outpost had changed in ways no one expected. The creatures had not tried to attack. Instead, they had become a regular part of the daily routine. Every morning, Haiwan would prepare food and leave it in the dispensers, and every morning the three cubs would come to eat. They had even started to show signs of personality and individual behavior that fascinated Haiwan endlessly. The smallest one, which Haiwan had begun to call Yunbi, was curious about everything. She would approach the fence slowly and carefully, sniffing at the posts and examining the structure with her intelligent eyes. She was the first to realize that humans existed on the other side of the fence, and she would sometimes sit and watch Haiwan work through the observation windows. The middle one, Min Seok, was more aggressive, but also more playful. He had started to chase his siblings around the perimeter, and Haiwan could see that the cubs were beginning to act more like young animals should act. They were learning to play and explore again, instead of just surviving. The largest one, Tae-ho, seemed to be the leader. He was careful and protective of his siblings. He always made sure they ate first before he ate. He would stand guard while they played, watching the landscape around them for danger. Haiwan realized that even though he was young, Tae-ho had already learned the responsibility of keeping his family safe. Jiwan had reluctantly allowed the feeding program to continue, but she kept a close watch on everything. The other staff members were divided. Some thought Haiwan was crazy for trusting predators. Others had started to see what she saw: intelligent creatures who were learning to trust humans in return. One afternoon, Haiwan had an idea. She was working in her quarters, looking through data on Vexathari intelligence and behavior, when she realized something important. The cubs were not just surviving now, they were thriving. But they were also starting to show signs of boredom. They were young and smart, and they needed more than just food. They needed something to do. They needed a way to use their minds. That night, she asked Jiwon if she could try something new. "I want to teach them," Haiwan said, sitting across from Jiwon in the commander's office. "I want to teach them about human culture and human behavior. Not to make them human, but to help them understand us. If they ever rejoin their pod or encounter other humans, it would be valuable knowledge, and it might help us understand them better too." Jiwon was skeptical, as she always was, but she could see the determination in Haiwan's eyes, and she had learned to trust her decisions. "What kind of teaching are we talking about?" she asked. "I will start simple," Haiwan said. "Basic interactions, communication patterns, and then I want to teach them about organization and structure. I think they will be good at it. Predators are natural hunters, and hunters understand patterns. I want to see if they can learn to organize things the way we do." "And how do you plan to teach them to organize things?" Jiwon asked with the hint of a smile. Haiwan smiled back. "My pantry needs reorganizing. I have been putting it off for weeks. I could use their help." 2 days later, Haiwan made a decision that would have surprised most people. She opened the door to the outpost and let the 3 Vex Thari cubs inside. The cubs were nervous at first. They had never been inside a human building before, but Haiwan moved slowly and spoke softly, and they seemed to understand that they were safe. She led them through the corridors to her quarters, and the cubs followed, their massive forms moving carefully through the human-sized hallways. When they reached the pantry, Haiwan opened the door and showed them the space inside. Shelves lined every wall, filled with containers, boxes, and packages. Everything was sorted neatly by type. Vegetables in one section, proteins in another, grains and starches in a third section. Everything was labeled clearly, and everything had a place. "I want you to help me keep this organized," Haiwan said to the 3 cubs, speaking slowly and clearly. She pointed to different sections as she talked. "This is where we keep vegetables. This is where we keep meat. This is where we keep grains. Do you understand? We keep different foods in different places." The cubs looked around the pantry with clear interest. Their noses were moving, testing the air, and Haiwan realized that for them, organization might look completely different than it did for humans. They were seeing and smelling things that she could not even perceive. Min-seok stepped forward and began to examine the shelves carefully. He was interested in the way things were arranged. He sniffed at different containers, and Haiwan could see him thinking, processing information, understanding the space. Yunbi moved along the shelves more slowly, more carefully. She seemed to be comparing the different sections, looking for patterns and relationships between the items. Her intelligent eyes moved from one shelf to another, cataloging everything she saw. Taeho stood at the entrance, watching both Haiwan and his siblings. He was evaluating the situation, making sure there was no danger. His protective instincts were still strong. "This is important work," Haiwan told them, and she meant it. "Keeping things organized helps us find what we need. It helps us know when food is going bad. It helps us live better. I want you to help me. I want you to understand what we do and why we do it. Can you help me?" The 3 cubs looked at each other, and something seemed to pass between them. Some kind of understanding or agreement. Then they all looked at Haiwan, and their eyes seemed to say yes. They were ready. They wanted to help. They wanted to understand their human friend better. "Good," Haiwan said, and she felt a sense of excitement and anticipation. "Let me show you how we organize things. Let me teach you our system. And maybe you can teach me something too." She did not know that she was about to witness something extraordinary. She did not know that these 3 young predators were about to show her a way of thinking that would change the entire outpost's understanding of organization and intelligence. She did not know that letting the Vexathari cubs into her pantry would be the beginning of something that would eventually change the relationship between humans and one of the galaxy's most feared species. She only knew that she was about to spend the afternoon with 3 intelligent creatures, showing them how to organize food, and that whatever happened next would be remarkable. HFY spent the first hour explaining her system to the cubs. She showed them the vegetables section and explained what vegetables were. She showed them the proteins and explained which animals they came from. She described the grains and explained their importance to human nutrition. She talked about expiration dates and food safety. The cubs listened carefully, and HFY could see them thinking, processing, understanding each piece of information. When she felt confident that they had grasped the basic concept, she told them she needed to step out briefly to retrieve some additional supplies from the storage facility. She left them in the pantry with clear instructions not to move anything, but to look and observe and think about the system they had just learned. "I will be back in just a few minutes," she said. "Just look at how everything is arranged. Think about why we put things where we put them. I will be right back." HFY walked out of her quarters and headed toward the storage facility. She was gone for perhaps 15 minutes. She was thinking about bringing back some different types of food items to show the cubs, expanding their understanding of human organization. She was excited about this experiment. Excited about teaching these creatures something about human culture. What she did not know was that while she was gone, the 3 Vexathari cubs were having a very different conversation. "This is wrong," Min Seok said to his siblings as soon as HFY left the room. He had moved to the center of the pantry and was slowly turning, examining everything with intense focus. "What do you mean?" Taiho asked. His protective instincts were still engaged, but his curiosity had been awakened. "The way the food is arranged," Min Seok said. "It does not make sense. It is organized by type, but that is not logical. Look at this." He pointed his nose toward 2 containers on opposite shelves. "These 2 items have completely different scents. The human says they are both proteins, but they smell nothing alike. One is rich and deep, and the other is light and almost sweet. Why would you put items with completely different chemical compositions next to each other just because they come from the same source?" Yunbi had moved to a different shelf and was examining the vegetables. She was sniffing carefully at each container, and her nose was working in the way that Vexathari noses worked, detecting subtle differences in chemical composition that humans could never perceive. "Look at the vegetables, too," she said. "The human put all these together, but their aromas are not the same. Some are fresh and green, some are dried, some are starting to break down. Why would you group by type when the actual substance is so different?" Taeho felt something stir inside him. He had been raised by a pod that lived by hunting and survival instinct. But he was also young and intelligent, and he could see the logic that his siblings were pointing out. The human system was not wrong exactly, but it was not optimal. It was not using the most important information available. "What would be a better system?" he asked. Min Seok's eyes seemed to light up. "Scent," he said simply. "Everything should be organized by scent. Not by human categories, but by chemical composition. Items that smell alike or that have similar aromatic profiles should be grouped together. Items that smell completely different should be separated." "But why?" "HFY's system is organized by food type," Taeho began. "Because scent is information," Yunbi said, stepping forward. "Scent tells us about freshness. Scent tells us about compatibility. Scent tells us about danger. If we organize by scent, we can instantly know which foods are nearing spoilage just by smelling the zone. We can know which foods can be stored near each other without their flavors mixing. We can know the age and condition of items just by their aromatic profile." Taeho understood now. What his siblings were proposing was not just a different system, it was a fundamentally superior system. For humans, who relied heavily on sight and labeling, the type-based system made sense. But for Vexathari, who relied on scent as their primary source of information, the scent-based system was incomparably better. "We should reorganize," Min Seok said. "Before Hai Wan comes back, we should show her what we can do. We should show her that there is more than one way to organize food." The three cubs looked at each other, and a silent agreement passed between them. They had been taught by humans to be helpful. Hai Wan had asked them to help organize the pantry, and they would help. But they would help in the way that made the most sense to their minds and their abilities. They got to work immediately. Min Seok began moving items from one shelf to another with careful precision. Yunbi worked on creating categories based on aromatic similarity, and Tai Ho helped move the heavier containers. They worked with surprising efficiency and coordination, each cub understanding exactly what needed to be done. They created zones of scent. Items with rich, deep protein aromas went together. Items with light, delicate vegetable scents clustered in another section. Dried goods that had a particular kind of pungency were arranged in a carefully maintained area. Fresh items that were still releasing volatile compounds were kept separate so they would not interfere with other items. Yunbi, the smallest and most detail-oriented, created small barriers between sections using packets of herbs. She seemed to understand that scent boundaries were important, and the herbs helped define where one aromatic zone ended and another began. It was surprisingly sophisticated. They even arranged items on a gradient. Some sections went from most pungent to least pungent. Other sections were arranged by how quickly their aromas would change over time. Tai Ho discovered that certain items, if placed together, would create new aromatic combinations that could help predict spoilage. By the time Hai Wan returned, the pantry had been completely transformed. What had once been a neat, human-organized space had become something that looked, to human eyes, like absolute chaos. Cans were stacked in seemingly random piles. Containers were grouped in ways that made no logical sense to someone viewing them with human senses. The careful labels and organization had been completely disrupted. Hai Wan stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at what the cubs had done. She could feel her frustration rising. Weeks of careful organization, weeks of work, all of it undone, all of it scattered and rearranged into something that looked completely wrong. But before she could say anything, before she could express her disappointment, she paused. She looked at the cubs, and she saw something in their faces. They were not proud of being destructive. They were proud of what they had created. They were waiting for her to understand. And Hai Wan, despite her initial frustration, took a breath and decided to listen. For several long seconds, Hai Wan could not speak. She just stood there, looking at what the cubs had done to her carefully organized pantry. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to tell them they had done everything wrong. She wanted to undo everything they had changed. But then she noticed something. The cubs were not acting defensive or afraid. They were standing tall, and they were looking at her with clear, intelligent eyes. They were waiting. They wanted her to understand something. They wanted her to see what they had created. Hai Wan closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. She had spent 3 years studying alien creatures and systems. She had always believed that understanding came before judgment. She had always believed that listening was more important than speaking. She could apply those beliefs now, or she could reject them because her pantry did not look right anymore. "Show me," she said finally, opening her eyes and looking at the cubs. "Show me what you have done." Tai Ho stepped forward. He was the leader, and he seemed to understand that Hai Wan was ready to listen. He began to walk through the reorganized pantry, and his siblings followed. As they moved, they showed her their system. Tai Ho pointed to a section where they had gathered items with similar aromatic profiles. He sniffed carefully at the area and then made a sound, a kind of low rumble in his chest that seemed to communicate meaning to his siblings. Then he moved to an adjacent section and did the same thing. The difference was clear to him. The two sections had distinctly different scent signatures. Yunbi took over then. She moved to a specific corner of the pantry and showed Hei-Wan how they had arranged items on a spectrum, from strongest to weakest, from most pungent to most subtle. She demonstrated by sniffing along the gradient, and Hei-Wan realized that the gradient was consistent. It made perfect sense in terms of scent intensity. Then Yunbi showed her something else. She pointed out containers that had been separated by small herb barriers. She sniffed on either side of the barrier and made a sound that was different from the first sound. Then she sniffed where there were no barriers, between containers that had similar scents, and made a sound that suggested approval. Min-seok showed her something even more interesting. He had arranged items in what appeared to be random groups, but when Hei-Wan actually listened to his explanation, she realized he was showing her something about shelf life. He would sniff at items and then point to similar items. He seemed to be suggesting that items with related scent profiles would also have related expiration rates. Items that smelled alike would spoil in similar ways, which meant you could instantly identify which items needed to be used first, just by knowing the scent pattern. As Hei-Wan listened and observed, something began to happen inside her. Her frustration started to fade, replaced by something else entirely. Fascination, respect, awe. "You organize this by scent," she said slowly, understanding dawning on her face. "You organized everything by chemical composition and aromatic profile." Taeho made a sound that seemed to be agreement. "But why?" Hei-Wan asked. "Why would you do that instead of the system I showed you?" Min-seok made a series of sounds and gestures. It took Hei-Wan a moment to understand, but when she did, it was like a light had turned on in her mind. The cubs were not rejecting her system because they were being destructive or rebellious. They had reorganized everything because, from their perspective, the scent-based system was objectively better. It was more efficient. It held more useful information. It was the logical way to organize food if you had the sensory capabilities to perceive scent the way Vexithari did. "This is incredible," Hei-Wan whispered. She moved through the pantry again. But this time she was looking at it differently. She could see the intelligence in every choice they had made. She could see the logic that had guided them. She could see that they had not destroyed her organization. They had transcended it. They had taken what she had tried to teach them and elevated it into something more sophisticated, something that worked better for their species and their abilities. She was so absorbed in understanding their system that she did not hear the footsteps approaching until it was too late. Ji-won appeared in the doorway, and her face went pale as she took in the state of the pantry. "What happened?" the commander asked sharply. "Hei-Wan, what happened here?" "They reorganized it," Hei-Wan said, turning to face her commander. She could see the concern on Ji-won's face. The worry that the cubs had become destructive or dangerous, but Hei-Wan was not concerned anymore. "They reorganized it based on scent profiles. Come here, let me show you something remarkable." Hei-Wan spent the next 20 minutes explaining the cubs' system to Ji-won. She showed her the gradient arrangement. She demonstrated how items with similar scents were grouped together. She explained the logic of using scent to predict spoilage and compatibility. Ji-won listened carefully, and Hei-Wan could see the understanding beginning to dawn on her face just as it had dawned on hers. This was not destruction. This was innovation. This was evidence of alien intelligence working to solve a problem using the tools and abilities that nature had given them. "They understood your assignment," Ji-won said finally, and there was wonder in her voice. "You asked them to help organize the pantry. They did. But instead of copying your system, they created a better one, a system that works for their biology and their abilities." "Exactly," Hei-Wan said. "They are not just following instructions. They are thinking. They are analyzing. They are creating solutions based on their own understanding of the world. The three cubs stood quietly, watching the two humans interact. They did not fully understand the human language, but they could sense the shift in emotional tone. Ji-Wan was no longer worried or afraid. She was impressed. "This needs to be documented," Ji-Wan said, and Hai-Wan could hear the excitement in her voice now. "This is the most significant piece of evidence we have ever gathered about Vexithari intelligence. We need to report this. We need to show people what these creatures are capable of." But Hai-Wan was already thinking about something else. She was thinking about what this meant for the future. If three young Vexithari cubs could reorganize a pantry in a way that was more efficient than human organization, what else could they do? What other problems could they solve? What other ways of thinking could they bring to human challenges? As she looked at Tai-Ho, Min-Seok, and Yunbi standing proudly in their reorganized pantry, Hai-Wan realized that everything had changed. The cubs had not just helped her organize food. They had shown her that intelligence and innovation were not limited to humans. They had shown her that different was not less. Different was sometimes better. Different could be extraordinary. The morning after the pantry reorganization, Hai-Wan woke up with her mind already racing. She had barely slept, too excited about the possibilities of what the cubs had shown her. She dressed quickly and made her way to the pantry, where she found the three Vexithari already waiting. Somehow, they seemed to know she would want to return. Over the next few hours, Hai-Wan worked with the cubs to refine their system. She understood now that she did not need to change their organization. Instead, she needed to find a way to make their superior system work within the human framework of the outpost. "I have an idea," she told them, speaking slowly and carefully. "Your way of organizing is better. It is smarter. But the humans here need to understand it in their own way. We need to create a system that works for both humans and Vexithari." The cubs seemed to understand what she was saying. Over the next hour, they worked together to create something new. On the outside of every container, Hai-Wan wrote clear human labels: the type of food, the expiration date, the nutritional information. These labels would help the human staff understand what was in the pantry using their own system of categorization. But inside, everything remained organized according to scent and chemical composition. The Vexithari way. The superior way. Hai-Wan labeled each section with both human descriptions and simple scent indicators. She created a legend that showed where different types of food could be found, but she arranged them according to the cubs' logic. It was a bridge between two ways of thinking. A hybrid that honored both species' strengths. Within a few days, word of the hybrid organizational system had spread throughout the outpost. Other staff members began to notice unusual benefits. Food waste dropped dramatically. Items that were nearing spoilage could be identified not by reading labels, but by understanding the scent zones. Items that would work well together in recipes were naturally located near each other because they had complementary aromatic profiles. Dr. Su-Jung, the nutritionist for the outpost, was particularly impressed. She spent several days studying the system and then approached Hai-Wan with a proposal. "This is remarkable," Su-Jung said. "The scent-based organization is more efficient than any system I have ever seen. I want to expand it. I want to apply it to the entire food storage facility." "The cubs did this work," Hai-Wan said. "We cannot claim credit for their intelligence." "Then we should be working with them," Su-Jung said. "We should be documenting this process. We should be studying how they think and how they approach problems." Over the following weeks, more and more staff members began to interact with the cubs. Scientists wanted to study their intelligence. Engineers wanted to understand how they perceived the world. The three young Vexithari went from being feared predators to respected members of the outpost research team. Tai-Ho, Min Seok and Yunbi seemed to understand that they had something valuable to teach. They worked patiently with the humans, helping them understand Vexathari sensory perception. They participated in studies and experiments. They showed remarkable intelligence and cooperation, but it was Min Seok who suggested the most important expansion of the system. One afternoon, while working with Haiwan and Sujung, the cub gestured toward the general storage facility, the massive warehouse where the outpost kept all of its supplies. "He wants to organize the entire warehouse the same way," Sujung said, watching the cub's gestures carefully. "Can we do that?" Haiwan wondered aloud. "If we have the cub's help, I think we can," Sujung replied. "And if we expand this system to our entire supply chain, the efficiency improvements could be enormous." Over the next several months, the hybrid organizational system was expanded to the entire warehouse. Tools were organized not by size or function, but by the scent-based classification that the cubs had developed. Medical supplies were arranged according to aromatic compatibility. Equipment was stored in zones that made sense from a sensory perspective. The results were beyond anyone's expectations. The outpost's operational efficiency increased by 40%. Staff members could find items faster. Inventory management became simpler. The hybrid system was so effective that Haiwan began writing papers about it. The paper was titled Predator Intelligence and Cross-Species Collaboration: How 3 Vexathari Cubs Revolutionized Our Understanding of Organizational Cognition. Haiwan made sure that the cubs were properly credited. She explained how Min Seok, Tai Ho, and Yunbi had contributed to the development of a system that was changing the way the outpost operated. The paper was sent to the main research council, and it spread across the scientific community like wildfire. Scientists and researchers who had spent their entire careers studying Vexathari from a distance suddenly wanted to know more. They wanted to understand how 3 young predators could create a system that was more efficient than anything humans had developed. But the most important consequence of the hybrid system was not the scientific recognition. It was what it represented. The hybrid pantry and warehouse were physical proof that humans and predators could work together. They were proof that intelligence came in different forms. They were proof that cooperation and respect could bridge the gap between species that the galaxy had believed could never understand each other. Jiwan called Haiwan into her office one afternoon. The commander was smiling, which was rare. She showed Haiwan a message from the Vexathari home world. "They received your paper," Jiwan said. "They want to send a diplomatic delegation to meet with you and the cubs. They want to learn more about this system. They want to establish official contact." Haiwan felt tears forming in her eyes. Everything she had worked for, everything she had believed in, was coming true. The gap between humans and Vexathari was closing. Understanding was growing. All of it had started with 3 hungry cubs and 1 human who was willing to see beyond fear and into the possibility of friendship. The hybrid system in the pantry had become more than just a way to organize food. It had become a symbol of what was possible when different species chose cooperation over conflict. It had become the foundation for a new chapter in galactic history.